there was one thing that I could tell every current and potential homeowner in the United States, it would be stop watching HGTV.
We'd all say that.
This is another episode of Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. And now the architects, Doug Pat and Stephen Chung.
You are listening to the Design Your Dream Home podcast with Doug and Steve. I'm Steve, that is Doug. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning, Stephen. Good to see you or hear you in this
case. We talked about maybe the video. We're going to do something a little special with video. So these interviews will be more podcast, and then we're going to do something fun at a very famous house and really kind of properly relaunch a video with a really nice video coming up soon. So that'll be something to look forward to.
Super fun. Can't wait.
Okay, so we've had some really interesting guests recently, and what occurred to me is that because you and I are both in the Northeast, that we have had a somewhat Northeast-leaning roster of guests. And I thought, well, we really should try to, because there are houses that are being designed in other parts of the country, Doug.
Yes, indeed. This is going on all over the place, right underneath our noses.
And there is a young architect, younger, I say younger than us, in the Southeast, doing some really interesting work. Jeremiah Russell, you know him through Instagram. I know him through Twitter. It's really interesting the way this world works now, but that's how we kind of have both interacting with him. So today our guest is Jeremiah Russell. Good morning, Jeremiah.
Good morning, Stephen. Good morning, Doug.
Good morning,
so,
Jeremiah.
Jeremiah, you are the principal of a firm called Rogue Architecture. Is it Rogue Architect or Rogue Architecture?
Architecture.
Because there is another Rogue architect out there, Doug found out, because he was actually looking at his website, and I said, I don't think that's our rogue architect. I think it's somebody else's rogue architect. Isn't that right, Doug?
Yes, sir. Jeremiah, why don't you speak to that? We'll clarify right away, right off the bat, so all our listeners know where to find you.
Sure. There's it's kind of a funny story. There's actually, I think, 4 variations of rogue architecture out there. There's one in Missouri, one in Texas, one in Colorado, one here in Arkansas, and I think also one in Oklahoma. And all of us are some variation of rogue architects, rogue architecture, or something like that. But we are located in Little Rock, Arkansas, and it is Rogue Architecture. I've been in business now we're in our 4th year, so approaching the end of our 4th full year in business, specializing mostly in residential design and construction.
Awesome. So, Jeremiah, I'll give you a quick bio so people know who you are besides that little intro. You graduated from the Savannah College of Art and Design. I think that's in Atlanta. Also with a master's degree. Oh, Savannah. Well, that's why it's called Savannah College of Art. Right. Okay, so near Atlanta. 10 years of practice with other firms across the Southeast, and then settling in Little Rock, Arkansas, and beginning your own firm called Rogue Architecture. And what I thought was really interesting is that not only do architecture, residential architecture, interiors, preservation, and design build. So you kind of do everything.
That's right. That's right.
From what I gather.
Yeah.
So I'd love to get into that with you.
Sure. So I guess the short version. So I went to college in Savannah, Georgia. SCAD does have other campuses, one in Atlanta, one in Lacoste, France, one in Hong Kong. We're sort of spread all over the place now. But I did spend 5.5 years in Savannah on my education, and it was incredibly valuable to me, especially just being surrounded by all of that historic architecture. Worked in Florida for a number of years after that, sometime in Virginia, and then like you said, I settled in Little Rock. My wife and I and our kids, we moved here to be closer to family that lives in Kansas City. And the firm that I worked for specialized in historic preservation, which was something that I was always really interested in. And for whatever reason, that job didn't work out. And so I found myself kind of going out on my own and thinking about, well, what kind of projects do I want to work on? What kind of work do I want to do? As you guys know, when you start your own firm, the answer is usually whoever's check cashes is the project that you're working on. But I really did kind of take an intentional look at the types of projects that I want to work on, and always really enjoyed residential architecture and just working with homeowners to design homes that are specific for their life, and just working with them on the details and the materials and the total experience of what it's like to live in that home and how their life is gonna be made better through architecture. And then so after doing that for about 2.5 years, I just there was a certain amount of frustration with working with other small residential contractors, and just kind of found myself wanting to do it all. So went out, got my residential builder's license, and started doing design build. Currently, I'm in the middle of 3 design build projects, which is a little bit stressful, but it's still a lot of fun. Just working on all those details, finding the subs to do the work, and to make a reality out of what I put on paper. And so it's been a lot of fun.
Well, why don't you describe what a design build practice or a project is? Because maybe some of our listeners really don't know what that means.
Sure. So design build is kind of a soup to nuts service. So we start with the design. Obviously, we sit down with the clients. We figure out the building program. What is the project? Is it a new house? Is it an addition, a renovation, or is it a restoration in terms of historic properties as well? And so we identify what that scope of work is, and then we sit down and we create the design. Our practice, we try to make the design process as collaborative with our clients as we can. So we meet with them to go over the design, to review materials, to talk about and sort of walk through the project to make sure that our clients have a full understanding of what it is that we're going to build. And then once all of that is done, then we do the pricing for them. We organize the subcontractors, the framer, the drywall guy, the tile guy, the millwork fabricator, the cabinet guy, help them select appliances, and then we build it. We go out, we get the permits, we put up the job sign and the porta toilet, and off we go.
Do you tell the clients that there's going to be some savings in working with you guys in both design and build?
Yes. So one of the, I don't want to say it's a selling point, but I mean, it really is. One of the things that I've been able to show over the last almost 4 years is that even if it's not design build, just speaking specifically about the architecture, the fees that a client pays me to do a full design, set of construction documents, and also the time spent doing contract administration, which is going out to the field to meet with the contractor during construction. That fee that they pay me up front will be saved at the end of the project. It'll be saved in time. It'll be saved in fewer change orders. It'll be saved in fewer mistakes. And it'll be saved in just having a better finished product when construction is complete. Obviously, design build is a little bit different than that, but similar in that the architect, me, has control of the project from start to finish. So I'm on the job site. I'm working with the subcontractors directly, sketching out the details if there's something that needs to be resolved in the field. For example, one of the projects I'm working on right now, it's an interior remodel only, but we gutted an entire kitchen, removed what we thought was a load-bearing wall, and turned out it wasn't a load-bearing wall, but the second floor, house was built in the 80s, and so the second floor framing was not up to current code, and it had about 1.5 inch sag. So that was something that we had to deal with pretty quickly, go in and sister on new floor joists and get everything, jacked up and level and things like that. So those are the kinds of things that, had it been sort of just a contractor, that the client hired and said, this is what I want to do, go, that could have been either A, a substantial expense, and B, a substantial amount of time just to, work stops. Contractors like, oh crap, we got a problem, blah, blah, blah. I don't know what to do. And, but whereas I was there and able to say, okay, well, this is the solution to that problem. Let's go ahead and get the material and get it done.
Right. Got it done a lot more quickly. Could you talk a little bit, Stephen, if this is okay, just talk a little bit about liability. I notice when I'm signing up for my insurance, my E&O, every year they ask me if I'm building something. Mm-hmm. So can you talk a little bit about the liability difference between what you do and what a typical architect only or contractor only would be doing?
Well, the interesting thing that I found was the liability really isn't any different. From an insurance point of view, obviously there was an increase. Right. So I guess to a certain degree there you are taking on additional liability because you're not just responsible for the drawings, but you're responsible for the execution. So obviously there is an increase in liability, but from a professional standpoint, just the way I do business, I didn't see an increase in liability because I was in the field anyway. I was working with the contractors anyway. I was working a lot of times with the subcontractors anyway. So it really boiled down to, I'm already doing the work. I might as well get paid for it.
Sure.
Is this relationship that in the process, is it that you present design build as an option, you have a more traditional route where you're the designer, and then as you're bidding, all these prices come back and you say, I think I can offer this at that price, or where in the process do you introduce this idea that you could do design build? And then if I'm homeowner, you say it's going to cost $100,000. They say, well, how can I really know if that's the right price because it's not being competitively bid? So how do they, here's questions that might come up. I mean, where in the process do you sort of mention this or offer this? And then what happens in a situation like that?
Sure. So it depends on the project. Some projects would be too small, for me to take on as design build. But if I do feel that the project is either of a size and scale that would be financially worth it, or if it's a project that requires a greater attention to detail during construction, then I'll offer that service up front. I always recommend getting alternate bids. It's just good business to keep the industry competitive as far as I'm concerned.
Do you do it, or do you ask the homeowners to do their own?
Well, so in that instance, I would recommend at least one or two other contractors for them to contact. And then, if they elect to do that, then I'll do that. I would put together my bid, they would put together their bid, and we would review them together. I don't see it as a conflict in terms of competition, because my price is going to be higher than some contractors, and I'm okay with that, because the subcontractors that I am going to hire know what they're doing, are going to do a good job. And so there's a little bit of a premium there for that than just going with the lowest price guy out there. Mm-hmm. And so really my job is just to educate the client as best I can. I'm not going to steer them towards my services. I'm just going to give them the advice that, here's the comparison of services. This contractor has this reputation, this contractor has this reputation, et cetera.
I would imagine there's an advantage to you pricing the project as well, because you know it so thoroughly that you're going to be able to sit down with a client and say, okay, when we're going to compare these things apples to apples, your bid to other contractors' bids, you can point out areas where you've got a number there and they don't have a number. So it's got to be a competitive advantage at some point when you're sitting down talking about it, even if you're more expensive.
Sure, there is I would say there is a little bit of a competitive advantage there, but they have the same set of drawings that I do.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I'm not like leaving sheets out for other contractors. So,
right.
I would say the argument there is if they're leaving things out, then they're not looking at the drawings.
But that's got to happen, right? I mean, that's the biggest
sure.
challenge I see when we put jobs out to bid is everybody misses stuff. And it's always setting the client at the end of the job or in the middle of the job.
Yep. And it's always the most frustrating thing for architects when, you get a phone call from a contractor that's building your job and they ask you a question and your response is always, well, what do the drawings say?
Right.
Their response is, what drawing?
Oh boy.
So maybe it is a little bit of a competitive advantage, but like I said, they get the same drawings that I create. So there really shouldn't be.
Right. But it's nice. It's nice when the client sees you as ahead of the game, as you've got, all your ducks in a row and you look like you know what you're talking about. Because we know how important these relationships are.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because I think about issues like, it can be very attractive, I think, for a homeowner. Then I think about things like when you have a traditional architect, contractor, and homeowner, and let's say that contractor wants to, submit a bill or an invoice, and they say, hey, 20% of the job is done. Architect says, let me go check out the work. Okay, looks good to me. Go ahead, you can pay this guy. Now it's like you're the same, right? So you're saying, hey, pay me. And you say, well, can you check the work? And say, okay, I checked the work. It's kind of the same person. So do you have issues like this where, I don't know, it could be a conflict, or sometimes it's better to have more safeguards or just one more layer?
Depending on the project, I would say yes. I would say ultimately it really boils down to, your integrity as a professional. And sure, I'm sure there's guys out there that are going to pad their billing, they're going to overbill, or, bill slightly forward to try to sort of get ahead of the game a little bit. I just don't do that. I don't see that as good business. But I mean, you bring up an excellent point that, depending on the project and also depending on the client, there may be a need for that more traditional design, bid, build contract where the architect is just the architect, the contractor is a separate entity, and everything's just done according to, AIA standards. I do use the AIA forms, G702, the application for payment, and closeout documents and things like that. So I do still keep a fairly detailed paper trail of my projects. And so, at least for most of my clients currently, that, offers fairly substantial level of comfort. Not only that, but just being able to go out to the job site and say, well, here it is. Here's what's been done versus what's been built.
Okay, so Jeremiah, it's been interesting, but actually I sort of deviated off our three pieces of advice for guests. But let's say that design build is number one, and it's kind of something to consider for a homeowner if the professional offers it, like yourself. Mm-hmm. That it really depends, as you say. I mean, it's something that maybe emerges as you go through the process, and it becomes an option. So, design build for a homeowner, that's something to consider. I think that there are some professionals out there like yourself that offer it. So, definitely ask about it. Mm-hmm. Maybe number two, I was thinking about your design philosophy, because I thought it was interesting reading your how you approach things. It's not it's different than other architects maybe. So, why don't you talk about your philosophy? You talk about good design.
Sure. So I guess over the years, one of the questions that I always get asked, and most architects do is, what's your style? How do you design, or what do you design? And having so much experience in residential architecture specifically, if I had complete free reign, I'm going to design a modern house just because that's the time that we live in. But in terms of design, I don't really have a style because these are not my houses. As an architect, there's there's a certain amount of pride and emotional investment into our projects, but at the end of the day, it's not our house. And so there's a certain separation of your ego that has to be taken there. And so in terms of design, that's the way I try to think about it, is this is their house. So it's not what style do I want, it's what style do they want. And in terms of design, my job is to guide, steer them towards solutions to their design challenges, whatever they are. So for example, if it's a new house, maybe it's a young couple with, small children. They're planning on living in this house until after their kids are grown and out of the house. So when we talk about design and kind of lead them through that process, we're looking at, okay, not just what are your needs now as husband and wife and 2 small children, whatever it is, but what does that look like in 10 years? How does your life change as your kids get older? And then how does the house change for you at that time as well? So we try to design a certain amount of flexibility in our home so that over time the home continues to suit that family. So it's at the beginning of design, it's really a process of getting to know them on a personal level, building that relationship, understanding how they live. Do they entertain a lot? Do they really like the outdoors? Is the plot of land that we're building on, is it acreage or is it a residential lot? And how does that impact, how they come and go and how they interact inside the space and connections to outside and things like that. So I don't know if that answers the question or not, but, every project is really different. And so every client that we have, we're starting with more or less a blank slate. We're going to pull some experience from previous projects, but really it's about starting fresh, getting to know that client. What is that client's needs, wants, desires, and how do we create a design that solves those things for them while still staying within a budget? Does that make sense?
Of course it does.
Yeah, it does. I mean, I think relative to people who are listening to this, the Design Your Dream Home people, it's a nice way of looking at the architect's job and what they do, because most people, I would say many people, perceive an architect coming into a project with preconceived notions of what buildings should look like, and this is my architecture, and what I'm going to do for you is something that I'm doing for you and not really with you. And so as you talk about being an architect and your job, it's a little bit different. I think that's really nice. And so, people can think about, well, I'm going to hire an architect because they're going to design something that is custom to me, not custom for them.
Yep.
So,
yep. Absolutely.
I have one homeowner that they're very nice. We're designing a house for them in Sarasota, and they she's my main contact. She often asks me questions like, well, do you think it'd be okay if we put the light here? I said, well, it's your house, so where do you want to put it? And she goes, oh yeah, I think she feels like she has to ask my permission because she thinks that she keeps calling it your design, and it makes me uncomfortable. I think I keep saying, hey, come on, we're a team, we're collaborating, and while I think it's nice to have some of that license because I'm able to kind of make it coherent, mm-hmm. I think it's not my house. So I say, if you leave me to my own devices, it's gonna be a big white box with, it's gonna look like my own house. So, which is fine, but I'm not, this is your house, and I think your idiosyncrasies, the things which make you special and different. And I know you like my style, but this is your home. So let's do things, that you want to do. And so she's been getting more confidence and comfort in doing that, and maybe too much now. Sometimes she's adding some weird things that I can't quite control. But anyway, no, it's still.
I think those are the best kind of clients to have. The ones that do ask questions, and specifically the questions. Is this appropriate to the design? Because homeowners, like Doug just said, they sometimes they get sort of a preconceived notion in their mind of what something should be, and then you show them something different, and sometimes the reaction instead is, well, I don't like that. Well, and then the conversation pretty much stops there, because how do you argue with that? You can't really ask why, because I just don't like it. Versus when you present something that maybe goes against whatever that preconceived notion was, and instead the question is, well, is that good for the design? Or if they ask, well, why did you do it that way? When they engage you in that process, and then you're able to engage them back and have a discussion about, well, and lighting especially is incredibly important to a house. I mean, how many houses have we been in that have, dark corners and, hallways with one recessed can light, and it's like walking through a haunted house, because there's just not enough light everywhere. But being able to engage clients in that discussion of, well, sure, we can do that, but X, Y, Z. These are the implications of that discussion or of that decision, and then have a conversation about it. And are those consequences of that decision acceptable? Or is there something else that we can do through design to maybe achieve the same goal but in a different way? I think those are really the best kind of clients to have.
So sometimes the architects that I talk about, they try to draw an analogy between them and like a doctor. And the doctor says, hey, you need to have surgery. And the architect says, hey, this wall should be over there. I really don't see them as the same. I think that, if I don't have surgery, I'm going to die. If the wall is to the right of 5 feet, then maybe it's not so nice. It could be a little 4 feet or something. So maybe it's more like a financial planner or something, where let me give you advice based on what I think makes sense here. But it's your decision. But here's what would happen if we do this. Here's what would happen if we do this. I think this is a good decision this way because of the cost of it, because I think it'll look better, it brings more light in. But, it's your decision. Whereas, again, having the surgery, maybe it's like, if you don't have this is your decision. You're going to die, or you can have the surgery. What do you want to do? So it's a little different, I think. But I sort of like that analogy of the financial planner, where we know what the end goal is, but there's a lot of different ways to get there. And if you don't want to be risky here, maybe we need to do something here. Or I think that there's ways to kind of adjust and to be working and collaboratively with your planner, and maybe in a way with an architect or a builder or designer like yourself, it's similar.
That's right. I agree completely with the financial planner analogy. It's our job to steer. It's our job to educate. And offer options. I think a lot of times some architects, and this isn't always a bad thing, but sometimes they have trouble separating their ego from that project. Some architects, they take full ownership of somebody else's house, and they're like, no, this is my design. I designed it this way for a reason. This is the way it has to be done. And that's just not how I've ever worked. Like you said, if a client just says, well, I want that wall over there. And then, at that point, it's my job to say, okay, pull out the tracing paper, set of plans, and sketch it out and say, if we put that wall here, X, Y, and Z, these are the implications of that design decision. This is the impact that it's going to have on your home. And then having a conversation about whether or not the consequences of that decision are acceptable is part of what we do, and being able to do that well, and kind of having that separation of our ego so that we can advocate for our clients during design is really important.
Yeah, I mean, for our listeners, this whole idea of designing your dream home, I just have to repeat what you said because it's profound. I think architects are at their best when they're steering, they're educating, and they're offering options. I know I am when I'm in the field and a client wants an answer and I can do those three things. Mm-hmm. I'm proving my value to these people. So I think that is a really good way of putting it.
Mm-hmm. Jeremiah, how about number 3? What are you thinking about these days? What's sort of on your mind in the world of residential architecture?
Oh, man. Cost.
Huh.
if there was one thing that I could tell every current and potential homeowner in the United States, it would be stop watching HGTV.
We'd all say that.
Where the hell are they getting those numbers from?
They're complete and total fiction.
My goodness.
And so, well, I will say that they're not fiction in terms of the fact that, when all of the labor, all of the appliances and lighting and, everything is donated by the sponsors of the show, it's really easy to build a house for, in 3 days for $150,000 or whatever ridiculous number it is. But yeah, just in terms of cost, if you're going to build a house or if you're going to renovate a house, talk to an architect first, or even talk to a contractor and get a realistic budget range, before you start talking about anything else. Just have an understanding that things cost money and take time. And they cost exactly as much as they're going to cost and take exactly as long as they're going to take to get done. The old adage, with enough time and money, you can do anything. But talk to an architect, kind of lay out your wants, needs, and desires, and then listen to your architect when he says, okay, this is your budget range. Because now after almost 15 years of practicing architecture, I'd like to think I'm pretty good about saying, no, this is your budget, this is the neighborhood you need to be in. These days, I spend a lot of time sending clients away because the bucket of money that they have, the stuff that they want doesn't fit into it, right. By any reasonable stretch. And it's a challenge. I mean, I understand just the world that we live in with the saturation of media, and and HGTV is not the only one, but one of the big players. Just the bad information that gets tossed around out there is really frustrating. So yeah, just get a correct understanding of cost implications and listen to your architect.
So Jeremiah, let's say that I want to build a new 2,000 square foot house here. How do I know what this budget is? I mean, do I look for similar homes of that size? Do I talk to the local builders that have built maybe the houses around the neighborhood, or how do I get to that sort of idea of what this thing will cost?
Sure. So that would be a good place to start. I would not look at sale prices. That's probably one of the biggest. That's probably one of the number one conversations that I have is somebody comes to me and wants to build a new house, and they say, well, I want to build a 2,000 square foot house in this neighborhood, and my budget is, $180,000 because that's what homes in that area are selling for. Well, generally homes in that area are selling for that much because they were built for a third of that price 30 years ago. And you've got 30 years worth of inflation tacked on to the cost of building that exact same house today. And that's one thing that people it's hard for them to understand. So, if I want to build a house today, it's going to cost a lot more than it costs to build the same house next door 30 years ago. So a couple of the ways they can do that is, again, contact local architects that do work that they, like, or that they think is what they want to build. They can talk to builders who are building homes, find a neighborhood that's currently under construction, find out who the builder is, call them up, talk to them, ask them what are their costs. One of the important factors is always to factor the cost of the land in it, because a lot of times when you buy a house, the initial cost of the dirt is no longer a factor. But that inflates your construction costs considerably. And, also talk to bankers, find out what, what home loans are going for. So, people that are building houses, how much are they getting in loans? Hopefully that's information that they can share. But yeah, architects, contractors, and bankers, talk to anybody and everybody that'll give them information.
I think talking to the banker is a really good piece of advice, because if I'm a banker and I'm doing construction loans, I know that's what I do. So let's say I do 50 of those a year. I have a really good sense of that neighborhood or that location and kind of the range of construction. If I'm a builder, I build one house per year for that one client. Maybe I know, I give you an idea, but it's really that banker, that lender that probably has a really good sense of, because of then such volume, right? So I think maybe that's a really good piece of advice.
Mm-hmm.
Doug, any last questions for Jeremiah?
Let's see here. Sorry, phone's ringing. I'm waiting for a phone call from a building inspector for like a month, and he's supposed to call me this morning. It's not him, though. No, I'd go back to the steer, educate, and offer options thing. I just think that's so insightful. I was wondering whether or not you ever get any clients that have an unlimited budget, or does everybody that come to you typically have a framework they're working within?
Doug's clients.
Yeah. There's always a very, very small bucket of funds that we're working with.
Okay.
A lot of times I end up sort of steering them to a reduced scope.
Okay.
Kind of one of the ways I start a design conversation is I'll actually ask the homeowner or the future homeowner to make 3 lists. What do you need? What do you want? And what would you like? And those are 3 very different lists. The needs list is these are the things that we absolutely have to have. The wants list is, once we've satisfied those needs, these are maybe some upgraded finishes, or, if budget allows. And then the what would you like list usually ends up being, if cost wasn't a factor, these are the things that I, would like.
Okay.
Generally, we can get most of those, obviously we're going to meet all of the needs. Generally, we can get most of the wants list into a budget within reason. Some of the areas that I actually try to help clients save money on is the replaceable items, like appliances, plumbing fixtures, things like that. I try to help them look for deals, things that look good, things that have good guts, but don't have that $600 Thermador logo on the front of it. You have to buy separately.
Right.
Yeah, you can get good appliances without spending $50,000 on your total appliance package for a kitchen. You can get, really good plumbing faucets and toilets and sinks without spending, $1,500 on that shower. Yeah, $2,500 on your kitchen faucet. Things like that are just, in my opinion, they're just silly. Especially with the way fashion changes. Eventually, you're going to throw that $2,000 faucet away and buy another one, and not buy a $200 faucet 10 times. You kind of see where that conversation can go.
Absolutely.
It's interesting because you're doing design build and building, you really know the costs. Where I was working with this other architect on this project, collaborating, and every time, it was a lighting designer actually, every time this person would submit a lighting package, it would then be submitted and they would price it and say, that light that he picked was like $4,000. I said, it was? It's like, He's like, does he not ever look at what these things are? Like, I'm not going to spend $80,000 on lighting for this, dining room. Like, what are you guys doing? I'm like, that's him. He doesn't know the cost. He just keeps picking. Look at this beautiful fixture. He shows it to me. I say, that looks great. That's awesome. I assume that you think that that the budget is whatever. He thinks that the homeowner would just fall in love with it. I said, they're not going to pay that much for a light fixture. Can you please let me know in the future, like, what these things cost? Whereas you really do have a good sense. It sounds like you're not just sort of saying, here, how about this? They say, yeah, we like it. And it's like, okay, great. Let me go figure out how much that thing costs. So I sort of appreciate that about your approach.
Yeah, and really when we price for design build, I try to put fairly healthy allowances in for things like that, just understanding that there is such a range of costs. Lighting is one of the big ones. Mm-hmm. And so I try to give what I think are higher end allowances for things. So, generally I'll budget like $500 for a ceiling fan and, $150, each pendant, $250 for a wall sconce, things like that. So that the homeowner has a fairly wide range. They can go to Home Depot or they can go down to the lighting showroom, and there's room in their budget for both of those. And, a lot of times there ends up being some give and take. We spend maybe a little bit more on the dining room light fixture and a little bit less on the bathroom wall sconces or, whatever it is.
Well, excellent. So that's anything else, Doug, or?
No, I think I'm in good shape. I've been writing things down the whole time. I really like your comment about need, want, like as well. That's great. I never really have to deal with that with clients, and but I'm just lucky. I mean, I work with Job, and he's got people that don't usually have an extraordinary. Well, they don't usually have budgets. They do. Yeah. Everybody's got a budget, but they're usually pretty large.
Yeah, but I find it really interesting because it sounds like that typically you're dealing with clients that have limited, but they have a budget, and it's really up to you to be creative, both as a designer and a builder, to try to get the most out of that budget and sort of squeeze as much as you can out. And it sounds like you're doing that great. So I really appreciate and respect that. It's a lot easier when there's a big budget. You can do whatever you want. I think Absolutely. It really takes a talented person to be able to pull it all together when you don't have unlimited resources. So I commend you for that.
Yep. And, also having the, just being able to be upfront with clients. Like I said, I turn away a lot of work because I just have to say, I'm sorry, your budget's not reasonable.
Yeah.
It's not that it's little. It's more that it's not that it's little like, oh, I can't make money on it. It's more like you guys are just not realistic, right?
That's right. Yeah. I think that's one of the, in terms of integrity as a professional, that's one of the most important things to be able to do is just say, no, I'm sorry, but, you need to reevaluate your needs list based on your budget. Just being able to essentially give that information away for free to try to help people, I think is important.
Right.
No, it's fantastic. Yeah. It's a great way to end. Hey, so Jeremiah, again, can you tell our listeners where they can find you? Any links or websites?
Sure. They can go to our website, www.roguearch.com. They can find us in downtown Little Rock, Arkansas, and Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're pretty much everywhere. Just Google us. Just the one in Arkansas, not Missouri or Texas, Colorado.
Rogue Arc in Arkansas. Thank you so much, Jeremiah. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. This was a lot of fun.
So you've been listening to Design Your Dream Home with Doug and Steve. Thanks for joining us. Shoot us an email from our website. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll be speaking with you next time.